Great. Good evening, everybody. I'm Amy Lozinski. I'm the mayor of Allendale, and we have actually with us some of your council. Let's see, Matt O'Toole is our council president. Councilwoman Homan is in the back. Councilwoman Lovis Solo is behind me, and Councilman Ed O'Connell. Thanks, everybody, for coming. The purpose of this meeting is to provide you with information and data on deer and deer management. We have experts that are coming to give us that information. We have people from the DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection, and we also have somebody from TYCO. TYCO is our animal control company that we have here in the borough, and they're, in my mind, they're the boots on the ground. So they're the ones that really know what's going on in Allendale. The deer situation in Allendale is not new. In fact, we had the DEP, what was it, like 7 years ago. But I will say, from my own personal observation, it has exponentially gotten more. I want to say worse, but a lot more deer have been in our town and our population. This is the number one complaint I get from residents. Not taxes, not anything else. It's the deer. So, as I said, we're here to provide you with data so we can all have an objective and informed decision as we go through this journey. I know some of the faces I recognize, but I will say I know that this is a topic that is triggering for some, and quite frankly, I'm sorry about that. I really am. I know that it is, but I think that everybody just needs to, stay calm and stay objective and listen to the experts. If there's anybody here that is from an outside group and they plan on making, a scene or and not being respectful, you will be asked to leave. So I just want to say that ahead of time. This is going to be a respectful meeting. The forum of the meeting is our DEP experts are going to speak first. If you have a clarifying question, you can ask a clarifying question, and then after that, we'll have Q&A. That it? Okay, I just want to actually give you the proper introduction now. Hold on. So we have Brian Schumann and Megan Mills. They're deer biologists with the New Jersey DEP Fish and Wildlife Deer Project in the Bureau of Wildlife Management. Brian is the deer outreach biologist and is focused on educating the public and local governments about deer biology and management. The outreach position in the Deer Project was created to provide resources and assistance to local communities with overabundant deer. Megan is the Northern Region biologist and is responsible for deer disease monitoring, deer harvest databases, and deer management issues which occur in the northern half of the state. After Brian speaks, we'll introduce TYCO. Thank you.
With it. All right, thank you guys. You'll have to bear with me as I work out the microphone. I do not like microphones. All right, so thank you for that warm introduction. And it's really great to see a lot of people here and interested in this subject. Deer are by far my favorite animal, have been for a long time. And it's a real treat to, come here and talk about, these beautiful animals. So let's get into it. So kind of the purpose of this presentation is so that all of you walk away with a better understanding of deer biology and get an understanding of why Fish and Wildlife makes the recommendations that we do and why it seems like the options for management solutions are the options that they are. And so, like the mayor mentioned, we're going to be going through some biological terms. I think it's important for everyone to understand some of these basic principles. But if at any point somebody isn't following and is not up to speed, you're not going to be the only one. Just raise your hand. We want everyone to be on board the whole way. But then, like she said, if you have like a big picture question, just kindly leave that till the end. It'll just help me keep my flow. So with that, why manage deer? What are the things that we look at in order to make decisions about deer management? And so these come down to three kind of broad categories: human health, ecosystem health, and public feedback. So for human health, one of the biggest ones that you guys are all probably quite aware of, it's been in the news locally here, are deer vehicle collisions. So this isn't the one that came over the overpass. This is down in Howell Township, this particular picture. But Bergen County was very recently, did have a deer come through the windshield. So obviously a lot of damage to property, but also, potentially fatal collisions. Tick-borne diseases, we'll get into a little bit more later, but deer are correlated with tick-borne diseases. And there's also other deer-related diseases that we're not going to go into as much depth this evening. So ecosystems health. This is still, I would say, an anthropogenic, like a human opinion. Nature will kind of work on itself in a lot of ways, but we are land stewards, and so we pay attention to what's going on. And when things are out of balance, particularly when things are out of balance, and it's human caused, there's something humans have done to change that balance. That's usually when an agency like Fish and Wildlife might step in and say, hey, well, we kind of caused this. Let's see if we can address it. So we're looking at deer are browsers. They eat a lot of vegetation. It's about, on an average deer, it's about 8 pounds of food a day that they eat. You scale that up to hundreds of deer in a local area. And this happens to be a diseased deer next to me, but malnutrition can occur when there's too many deer competing for resources. So we're kind of grouping in the deer themselves, their own health in this category. The spread of invasive disease we'll go into a little bit further. And then public feedback. So that's a picture of a soybean grower, excluded deer. And by the way, there still are some seats up in the front if I didn't make this probably the text big enough in every slide. So if anyone can't see, just come on up. This is from a farmer that excluded deer from this small plot just to demonstrate how much crops that they're losing annually to deer. We could see this with other types of exclusions. And actually, these types of, we call this a browse line, the area that deer have access to. It's very visible driving in. I could see people's landscape, the trees in the area. It's all been morphed and conformed because of deer damage in the area. And then there's a desire for the resource. Like I said, my favorite animal, they're beautiful animals. We don't want them exterminated. We do love seeing them. They're a precious commodity. It's wonderful we have them in New Jersey. So there is that desire for the resource, and we balance that as well. So we're kind of balancing between these two ideas. There's the social carrying capacity and then the ecological carrying capacity. And I want to drive home that these are social decisions that we're making. So the social carrying capacity is, like I said, human health, ecosystem health, our assessment of the ecosystem and our assessment that things could be better, and then public feedback. Whereas the ecological carrying capacity, and this is simplified, but the ecological carrying capacity, just how many of those critters can we fit into those woods? We want a lot of deer in those woods. That's basically what an ecological carrying capacity. Is that necessarily a healthy capacity? No. Like we said, we can make an assessment and say that's probably not the best for the deer or the woods. So looking at these issues, we can see that there is an issue with the number of deer. So we can kind of assess that based on some things that you guys are experiencing. She said that it's her biggest complaint. Usually when we can no longer mitigate deer damage just the magnitude of the issue is so high, it becomes quite apparent that there's an issue with the abundance of deer. We do have studies that say, like in forests, more than 25 deer per square mile is unhealthy, and we can document bird diversity declines, tree species declines, invasive species creep up because deer unevenly browse on these native species that are palatable to them. So we have that, but around here, it might just come down to that it feels like too many. I cannot grow a vegetable in my garden. They jump over every fence I put up. Sometimes they get caught up on the fences. It's not healthy for them. It's not healthy for us. So with that, what are the limiting factors that get us to a deer population that is overabundant? So this is the bit of the biology. I'm going to try to go somewhat quickly through it because it's probably the most dry part of the presentation. But it's important for you guys to understand why we're going to talk about the things we're about to talk about. So, and we have among the things that calculate into how many deer there are, we have the birthing and development rate. So fecundity is just the number of offspring that a deer can have at a time. So on average, it's about in New Jersey somewhere between 1.5 to 2 deer per doe per year. The gestation period, that's just the length of pregnancy. Reproductive seasonality, so like some animals, they reproduce throughout the year. That's mostly in tropical areas because of our harsh winters. They can't have babies in the winter. Also, well, we'll leave it at that just to keep it simple. And then sexual maturation. So like a rabbit can be born in the spring, breed, its offspring will then breed themselves, and they could have 3 generations, 4 generations in a single year. Whereas deer, we all have observed that their fawns are born in the spring and then they grow up. So of these 3, the point of this is that the only thing that we can really mess with out of these 3 things with birthing and development rates is fecundity. We're all aware of the concept of birth control. That is a thing with in wildlife, certainly in agriculture. So we're going to explore that idea. What can humans do to affect fecundity? So then there's births and there's deaths. So survival rates, just breaking them up into natural deaths and human cause. So senescence, just how long it takes for them to die of old age. Disease, obviously not something that we want to introduce or create more of. And then predation. And then under human cause, so predation being one that's commonly brought up. So people often ask, well, we used to have mountain lions in New Jersey. We used to have wolves in New Jersey. Why can't we do something with predators that can just take care of the problem for us, out of sight, out of mind? And then we have human caused. So deer vehicle collisions, we're going to talk about this a little bit more at length. And lethal removal of some shape or form. We'll get into some details about that as well. And then of those 2, obviously, lethal removal, deer vehicle collisions, we're not going to increase that artificially to try to drive down the population. Feels a little unethical. Okay, so creating a little room. So then we have immigration and emigration. So emigration being them leaving. So we have natural dispersal, and then we have trapping and relocating. So we can't really encourage them to leave. They have what's called high site fidelity. They live where they live. In a suburban area, they don't leave about 1/10 of a square mile. So that deer you see in your backyard every day, it is the same deer in your backyard every day. So then trapping, that was a big hit of a joke. Thank you guys. That's great. So trapping and relocating, that's another very common one that we get asked about. Why can't we just pick them up and put them somewhere else? So let's explore those. Oh, I'll back up a sec. Let's explore these 4 options: trap and relocate, lethal removal, predation, and fecundity. So just renaming them a bit: birth control, the introduction of animal predators, lethal management, and trapping and relocating. So for animal predators, there are a few pros. So the pro is that is more of a feeling. It feels like we're letting nature do its thing. That's the big plus. There is an increased wildlife diversity if we reintroduced mountain lions back to their native range. And then it's perceptively cost efficient once instituted. So probably everyone's thinking about the negatives. Obviously, I could probably breeze through this, but it would obviously complicate wildlife conflicts. So, we do have pets, we do have children. There's big issues. And I'm going to try to get on this theme of how much control we have over it. We obviously have very little control of what a mountain lion does once it's here. And will it even stay in Allendale? The answer from a biologist is no. Complex habitat requirements, that's why. And it's obviously quite costly up front. There are places that want less mountain lions, but as an agency, we're not going to, for the sake of the animal, we're not going to do it. We're kind of going the order of least likely to most likely. So trapping and relocating. So it has high animal rights group support. Again, it kind of feels like, we're not harming them, we're not doing anything wrong to the animal. And we certainly have a high amount of control. We toss a lot of money at it, we will get a lot of results out of it. Some of the issues are you need that destination. So you have a pest issue, you have an animal that's creating issues for you. It's not kind to your neighbors to just take that issue and give them to somebody else. Another bit of a recurring theme in this presentation is unintended mortalities. So with any capture of a wild animal, it's very stressful for the animal. There's ways to mitigate it, but usually if you're capturing the animal, most studies find there's about at least a 5% mortality rate to that animal. They tense up, they struggle, and they can never recover. It's called capture myopathy. And then, of course, with this, relocating animals, like I said, they have high home range fidelity. You're dropping them off in an area they're absolutely naive to. Certainly, if we move a Bergen County deer to, the Midwest, it's going to have quite an adjustment period and probably not fare well. Disease transmission is honestly the one that just makes this completely off the table. We're not going to get into it in depth, but there's a disease. It's fun to think about: chronic wasting disease. It's mad cow disease for deer, and it is in the U.S. and pretty much all states have banned the transportation of wild cervids or wild deer. Obviously, quite costly. So birth control. Getting a little closer. So once again, same thing. It has high support because it feels like our impact on the individual animal is less. So there's a lot of people that are pushing for this recently. So I'm going to go a little bit more into depth on this particular one because it is being talked about quite a bit. So I want to point out that this is very explicitly management through attrition. So if we think about our biological rates, if all you did was, let's say you removed all possibility of deer reproducing, you still will have the same number of deer every subsequent year that you did that first year if none of them die. And so it is still lethal management to achieve a reduction. And so people who are like hyped up on the semantics, I try not to get too much on the semantics. They'll tell you that it's actually not a management strategy for reduction because there's that implied lethality associated with it. It's costly. We live in New Jersey. We're happy to pay money for things that we want, but this is quite a bit of money when compared to some of our other options. So an important thing with fertility control is that modeling studies as well as actual studies on the ground that have been performed with this with wild deer is that you need to capture and treat about, usually the target's about 80% to have any hope of a population reduction. Most of that is because you still have deer coming in from neighboring municipalities. So birth and fertility control, it's only ever been recommended in closed systems. So it's been used in like an island or something like that, or on a private estate or, some sort of closed system where those deer that you treat, there's not those outside factors. And it's obviously a very high commitment. And compared to some other management strategies, if you were to say, capture 100 deer, spend $100,000, capture 100 deer, and treat those does. If you stopped doing that And then you will not see the gains. And so with a change of administration, it's just important to think that, this is something that has some consequences down the road. And it requires the commitment from the local area to attempt it. And very often in the literature, some places try it and then they immediately forsake that strategy. We'll talk about it a little bit more. So there's two options. Just real quick, I gotta watch my time. Just real quick, there's two options: chemical fertility control and surgical sterilization. So chemical fertility control, just generally, it has not been proven to work. The chemicals, they're not safe for human consumption, but people do eat deer. So you still have to capture the animal because it needs to get tagged. And usually not only does the deer get tagged like an ear tag, it often gets a tattoo somewhere on its body to let somebody know that it's not safe to consume, because we do not want, honestly, there's already a fertility issue in the U.S., and we don't need more of that by accident, something that's preventable. But then also, the current drugs, you treat them twice, 2 subsequent years, so you have to capture the animal 2 years in a row, inject the drug, and it still only has about an effective rate of 67%. So about 33% of the does are still having fawns that next year. So compare that to surgical sterilization. If you perform an ovarectomy on a deer, you capture it, you remove its ovaries, it is not going to have a baby the next year. So already this is a bit of a fringe strategy. And so chemical fertility control, it doesn't even compare to the effectiveness of surgical sterilization, because you need to capture it anyways. You might as well get 100% efficacy out of it. But then there's unintended consequences. So we'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. But so like I said, for the cons of this is it requires capture no matter what. So that's a lot of effort. That's extra expense. You need a veterinarian on staff. Extremely long timescales. They talk about, it's like 10 years of treatment of about 80% of the animals for about like a 30 to 40% reduction in deer. Compare that to if you put that level of effort in the first year and, humanely euthanize those deer. Let's say you still captured them, but just euthanize them. That's a reduction that year. And those deer are not getting hit by cars. They're not, they're not creating these damages. And if the intention is reduction, that is a straighter line that avoids some of these unintended consequences. So, long time scales, immigration issues I mentioned. It does have that implied lethality that I mentioned. It's, obviously it's less efficient. It's quite costly. And to go into a little bit more detail, this is just like a word of warning about, stuff that you hear, press releases and whatnot. If a municipality spends hundreds of thousands of dollars, or like New York City spends millions of dollars attempting this, like Staten Island did, there's just the pressure to get your stakeholders to think it's all going great. So they did put out this release. In 2020, they said deer vehicle collisions down 60% from the previous year. So I get paid to do this, so I had more time. I looked at their data. And so the year that it went down, 60% was here. But previous to that, with the start of treatment, it actually went up 164%. So the reason for this is basically it's increased mate searching. So if you have infertile breeding aged deer in the population, you have a lot of deer that are going to be seeking someone who will actually breed with them. So that in many studies has been shown to actually increase deer vehicle collisions. And we all laughed about not wanting to do that as a management strategy. But very genuinely, that is implicitly part of that. Ovarectomy seems to have a decreased amount of deer vehicle collisions that are associated with it. The issue is, like I kind of mentioned, are people willing to publish that what they did had that effect? Unfortunately, that's not happening all the time. Okay. So, well, if it's a clarifying question, somebody has a question? No? Okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I love talking about it, so we'll talk about it more. So lethal management. So this has much wider support in the sense that it's something that we're all more familiar with. Maybe not in Bergen County, but it is something that we're all aware of happening. Every state has deer hunting that occurs in it, and we have regulations, and we have kind of ethics, and we have a history of it that we're familiar with. So usually this is because it's efficient, it has wide support. Um, you have a high level of control. So similar to these other things, if you invest more resources into it, you will get more results. It's sustainable, and half of it's sustainable because just from an individual level, this is food for people when they're hunted, and it's not like big farm where you're uncertain about the conditions that the animal was living in when you table that animal. So it's sustainable from that sense, but it's also sustainable for the municipality. Like I said, it doesn't require, if you remove a lot of animals and then stop the next year because there's a change in administration or the town, the residents don't want it anymore, you still accomplished that thing that you needed to accomplish. You probably should keep up with it, but there's not that net bad thing that happens. It's inexpensive comparatively. It can be free. And then the American Veterinary Medical Association, our regulations as a state, we make it so that, the legal methods to kill a deer with hunting is ethical. So some of the cons are that it does require a little bit more coordination. So just one landowner alone is not going to have a population level impact on the deer population. So it requires a little coordination, perhaps multiple municipalities coordinating to take action on the issue. And it definitely lacks for people that are just ethically against humans harming animals. It's just not going to have that support. You are killing the animals. So people that are unfamiliar with that, currently we do get our food from plastic bags at the grocery store, and we're pretty far removed. I looked it up. In the U.S., it's about 3% of people that are vegetarian, 1% that are vegan. So about 97% of us eat meat and are at least somewhat, okay with the idea that, we are eating animals on a daily basis. So it does lack the animal rights group support that want no harm to the animal. But like I said, otherwise it has wide support. So I'm going to investigate a claim now. I'll investigate a few claims that the focus needs to be on managing deer conflicts, not deer numbers. And so we're going to just talk about that a little bit. Is it possible to address these issues without doing any of those four things that I just talked about? So for deer vehicle collisions, I don't want to bore everybody, so I'm just going to plop these on here. Here's just a few options that have been investigated. This was by, I think, Michigan DOT, if I remember correctly. Maybe it was a Western state. But a Department of Transportation investigated what has worked and what has not worked in terms of reducing deer vehicle collisions. Fencing was the most effective. If there's movement corridors and you can funnel them to, say, like an overpass, that can reduce. But we're talking about Allendale tonight. Overpasses and more fencing, stuff like that. It's either undesirable or it's just not practical. And I think once again an important point to make that when we're trying to do something that is kind of mitigating the issue or kind of a workaround, we don't consider that. So if you were to limit the number of deer getting killed in deer vehicle collisions, which in Allendale is going to be one of the primary mortality events for adult deer, then you're going to have more deer that survive annually, and then you will have an increase in population size. So just addressing the deer vehicle collisions and preventing that, it's just going to lead to more deer. And perhaps just with more deer and more of those other negative conflicts, you might actually arrive at, again, a stable, high number of deer vehicle collisions, but there's just going to be more deer in people's backyards as well. So, as a biologist, we're thinking about the population level impact, not just the individual deer. So for forest health and agriculture, again, so these are some solutions that work locally. So fencing exposures, without getting too much in the weeds, my kind of cool bullet point is that if you were to exclude deer from a small area, let's say you do that at scale, and let's say you start excluding them from all of your forests, you're effectively increasing the deer density in all the surrounding areas. Because if you remove habitat from deer that are there, then those deer still eat that 8 pounds of forage every day. So you're just, again, you're kind of shifting it onto your neighbors. So this is advisable for someone like a farmer. I think that's my next bullet. And it's advisable if you have like a rare plant population, like trillium or like whatever, like a plant that's very susceptible to deer, you could protect that local population. That might make sense. But usually you still need to do some sort of population level management. Repellents, again, deploying this at scale doesn't really work. And I'm sure a lot of you in the room have attempted this. So, deer need that nutrition. They will, if it tastes bad, they will eat it if they're desperate. So we see that throughout the year. In harsh winters, their diet changes. On your arborvitae or the northern white cedar in some of your yards, I saw that that's not palatable in the summer, but in the winter, they are browsing on those. So tick-borne diseases. This was a fun one that I came across multiple times. Honestly, I find it a little frustrating. The quote says, "The CDC doesn't recommend hunting to control Lyme disease." So I took the liberty as like an official to contact the CDC because they answer me quickly. And they told me that they don't make those recommendations. We're the wildlife biologists. We're the ones who would recommend something like hunting. They have good recommendations for backyards, checking yourself and things like that. You can certainly check their website. There's good information on there. But here is a study. This is a quote from a study that the CDC was a part of. They were a co-author. And when deer are eliminated from some habitats by hunting or fencing, the abundance of ticks typically is strongly reduced. So across almost all studies that have investigated this, if you reduce the number of deer, then one big one that we look at, the black-legged tick, which is the host for Lyme's disease. I know, because of my profession, I know many people who have Lyme's disease or have had it. It's a devastating disease. And that population of ticks in the area goes down dramatically. And here's an image of a deer. Most of that's actually scarring from previous ticks. But a tick load, I almost put in the presentation. I'm glad I didn't. But on fawns, it's devastating. It will kill them. A tick load like this adult doe has experienced. So it's just not. It's not healthy for us. It's not healthy for the deer to have that tick load. There's more nuance with this. Ticks are generalist, but deer host a lot of ticks. So let's talk about the different types of lethal management programs that may or may not be appropriate for somewhere like Allendale. So these are kind of scaling up, going from unmanaged hunting, managed hunting to contracted hunting. So unprofessionals going out there for fun, essentially, all the way up to professionals who are getting paid to remove the deer. So for unmanaged hunting, it's volunteers, like I said. They are required to get our hunter education, so they have to demonstrate proficiency with the weapon, safety with the weapon. They hear about common mistakes that people make, and then they learn how to not make those mistakes. And so the regulations that were on an unmanaged hunt would be only what we do. So anyone in the room that's familiar with it, it's like, 14 pages in our digest of regulations that New Jersey hunters need to know. Other states like Colorado, it's not 14 pages. New Jersey, we're the most highly densely populated of humans in the country, and so our regulations on this type of management are very strict. So these graphs, you can't read my small print. This is just illustrating our perception or our opinion about these comparatively. So I list it as like a moderate efficacy, a lower control because you're not actually in unmanaged hunting. Like a public official is not interfacing with the hunter. Think of like Stokes State Forest if anyone's been there. This is kind of more so what I'm talking about is you're going out with your friends to go hunting. Some conflict potential. The cost is, you're not even talking to them, so it's next to nothing for the municipality if they were doing that. Places like a lot in South Jersey, the municipal properties down there, they have this where they don't even, it's not even in their ordinances. Just everyone knows that the guys are out there, and there's no issue, so they don't even regulate it whatsoever. Managed hunting, however, is really more so what we're talking about. It's managed hunting or contracted hunting for your municipality. And managed hunting, all that is that the municipality or, like a nonprofit park, whoever is adding regulations to that process to make sure it is safe and appropriate for that specific local area. So those hunters would have to get our state safety certification. But then, in addition, they would be vetted and monitored, either in cooperation with us. We do background checks on hunters to make sure they've never committed any violations in any 50 states, or I think even Canadian provinces. Yes, Canadian provinces. But those regulations, we'll get into a little bit. You can make it as restrictive as you want, and you should. This is is anyone the council members aware how built out Allendale is, like by percent, like 95% built out the properties. 95. Yeah, it's most Bergen counties 95% built out. So, we're kind of thinking about so maybe it's like 5% of the area that, this might be happening. And there should be incentives. So we don't want people out there just going out for fun. They have a task that they're doing on behalf of the municipality, and so they should meet that task. So the efficacy goes way up because you have all these additional regulations, you have additional control, you meet with them every year, you talk about your expectations. And then contracted hunting. So again, this is paid sharpshooters basically. So there's companies that do this. There's a handful that operate in New Jersey. When you get into this, let me get to this CBDMP. It stands for Community-Based Deer Management Permit. That is basically, if there's any exception whatsoever to our normal hunting regulations, you need to apply with us to get an exemption to that. In some cases, it's like hunting at night out of vehicles. So that's not something that we would generally consider as like fair chase ethics for the animal. But it would meet those ethical requirements from, the Veterinary Medical Association, so the deer is dispatched ethically, but we're doing it in such a way that we have better coverage. And so on that, you have much higher control. Again, you're spending a lot more money in this case, but your efficacy will go way up because you're not as restricted by those other regulations. So to talk a little bit about the state regulated regulations, just not go too much in depth. So we have our hunter education. So everyone who hunts anywhere in the state is required to have that. And where they demonstrate, like I said, the shooting and safety proficiency. A lot of people don't know that in New Jersey we have safety zones. So for firearm, which I don't think anyone's talking about for here, the regulation is 450 feet from any building or school playground. So if somebody so chose to give permission, they could. So if somebody wanted to hunt near a house and you got permission from those houses, you could do that. Likewise with the archery. For archery equipment, it's 150 feet from any building. That includes like a shed, that you cannot even fire the projectile into that area. And then 450 feet, obviously, from any school or playground. We have additional requirements for that for obvious reasons. And so this is like our blanket. This applies everywhere in the state. But sometimes municipalities that do these management programs, they incorporate additional restrictions. One example is from trails. If it's heavily hiked, then maybe you shouldn't be 75 feet or so from a trail, just to remove that potential conflict. Hunters can easily tell the difference between a deer and a human, but it just sometimes it makes people uncomfortable to see somebody with a bow. It feels out of context for people sometimes. So we recommend that any sorts of these programs, it should be high public awareness. That's part of the reason why we're here today, is just so that everyone's thinking about it, everyone's aware that it's like these things are being considered. You don't want anyone surprised. I won't name the county that did this, but recently we had a county open up hunting again in the county parks after many years. And several hunters had the cops called on them as people in the woods with weapons, because the local police department was not notified, and there was no signs put up at the trailheads that this was happening. So that's just that's bad management. People need to be made aware, set the expectation that that's happening, and then people can make an informed decision. If they're not comfortable, maybe they don't walk their dog on that day that there's hunters in the woods. It's safe, but they just might not feel comfortable, and people should be able to be educated to make that decision. This map is just an example of some safety zones. I apologize, it's going to be hard to see. But it's just sometimes we assist. This was for Edison Township. We assisted with making some of these maps just to demonstrate how much of the area and some of these parcels that are already within our safety zones as a state. So some of the examples, this is more so just musings, some stuff that I find appealing for some of these management programs. Archery only, I think that's probably what we're talking about to start with, at least. It has that decreased projectile range, and it's not noisy. Elevated tree stands. I like this one because it makes it so that the hunter can see more around them, and it also means that every shot is taken downwards, so the earth stops the arrow. So when you're hunting across flat ground, something that hunters learn in hunter education is knowing your target and beyond. And it can be more difficult to know what's beyond your target if the earth isn't in the way. So safety zones for trails. I mentioned this one. I think it's a good idea. Just identifying places that people might be in the woods at more regularly, and just removing that conflict. It's not really polite for the hunter who's investing their time. They're volunteering to do this, and if they're right next to a trail, that just doesn't make sense. And then, like I said, the maps. So additionally, most of these programs you have to put a permit up on the dashboard so local PD can verify who's where and when. Sometimes they have to call in to the local police to tell them when they're up in a tree stand and where. And then encouraging the harvest of does. So we kind of talked about it with surgical sterilization. The females are the drivers of population growth. And so hunters need to be harvesting does, probably at least at a 2-to-1, 3-to-1 ratio to start with, just so that you're driving down that reproductive rate as well as removing those individuals. So this is just to impress you that there's a lot of words on these permits. There's a lot of stuff that you can do. It's fun. Honestly, it's fun to see what different municipalities come up with in the regulations. We get to study it and see what works and what doesn't. This is Mercer County Parks. They have a pretty exemplary program that's been very successful. So kind of a closing thought for me is that this is your neighborhood. And so I put up I believe I did 150 feet for archery on this. So the areas that aren't blue in there, that's just showing that there's already, without special permissions, without people, coordinating with their backyards and stuff to make additional opportunities available, there already are places in the municipality that this is perfectly appropriate for. You put the signs up and stuff like that. Maybe you go as far as to close the park for a week of the year, so that people feel really comfortable. But these places already exist where you don't even need additional permissions. And then another point. So actually, I heard from a caller the other day. They were calling because they were concerned about recently a deer went through a windshield of somebody's vehicle in Bergen County. And unfortunately, who they spoke to with their local area basically directed them to the Bergen County Parks as the like deer managers in the area, and they don't do deer management. So that's frustrating because they obviously have the most appropriate areas for it. But the point that I want to make about that is that they own a very sparse amount of land. They control a very sparse amount of land in the county. Even if they exterminated every single deer on their property, the deer in your backyard are still your deer in your backyard. So this is not an issue that's going away because Bergen County suddenly steps up. Okay, so the point I'm making is that these are local issues that require local solutions. And then I guess my final thought is that Megan and I, we get paid for you guys to help you guys. So, if your local leadership and this administration wants to move forward with any of this stuff, we're here to talk with them and identify any safety issues, figure out what's appropriate where, what's inappropriate where, and come up with a plan. So that's our role with this, is to help with making those recommendations. So, if anyone, I apologize. Could be bigger, but this is my email. It can be shared pretty easily, but if anyone wants to come up, I have a few cards. You could take pictures or something like that if anyone wants to follow up. And then are we doing a Q&A now? Okay.
If you please stand up, say your name and what town you're from, we'd appreciate that. So,
and then Megan, do you want to join me up there?
Question. If we talk loud enough, we should be okay with that mic back there.
Yeah, do you mind like directing the questions to us? Thank you.
Gentlemen, back.
Yes, Henry Sanger, 2010. So from 400 to 100.
Yeah, it's a great question. And it kind of, yeah, I could repeat it. Apologies for that. So the question is, do we as biologists believe that the 150-foot rule for archery, not 450 feet as it previously was, but 150 feet, that safety zone, do we believe that's appropriate for areas like Bergen County? And it kind of brings up, I'd say like a bigger theme behind all of this, and that's that any action that we take, whether it's getting into our cars to drive to work every day, it requires a level of human responsibility. So my answer would be that if somebody wanted to shoot their bow 450 feet at a house, they could do that. So the answer really is that yes, that is more than safe for somebody practicing safe hunting. Somebody who's been certified with us, that is more than safe. If somebody's making an irresponsible decision, then no regulation can stop somebody from making an irresponsible decision. So that's how I feel about it. And the 150-foot rule has been extremely good, both for safety and for access to deer management.
That's right.
In working with the government officials here in Allendale, what period of time do you think it would take for you to work with them to establish a deer management program here? Is this something you could see happening in the fall of this year? And a follow-up question to that would be, are there specific hunting times, or is it a wide open season from now until, about?
Great question. You want to take part two? Part two or the whole thing? Sure. You want to?
So Allendale itself is inside of our deer management zone 36. 36 is one of our most liberal zones. So for archery, deer season started on the. I don't know if this is going to be.
You want to?
I don't want to let me step over there. I don't want to turn away from you as a man. Yeah. Okay. Let me start over. So the question was, how quickly could we get something going once we start talking with the township officials, and then how long would the season be? Allendale is in zone 36, which is one of our most liberal zones for deer hunting. So deer season started last Saturday up here and will run through the third Saturday of February. So the archery season runs consecutively. It's 3 separate seasons, but bow runs consistently from the second Saturday in September through the third Saturday in February every single year. So the fall bow season starts in September. Permit bow starts around like mid-October-ish, and then winter bow starts January 1 and goes through February. The other part of this is that zone 36 is in an unlimited antlerless bag limit area, so we can take out as many does as is necessary, as many as the hunters can get to. They can take them out, which is what's going to drive the population down, is removing the does. The other nice part about this is that basically Allendale can build their own program. Our rules are that you guys can be more restrictive than us, but you cannot be less restrictive. So if that means that you're going to open up properties and you're only going to allow hunters in from, a half hour before shooting time to noon, or, they're only going to be allowed in like not like high traffic areas or times of year. So if you guys only wanted to have hunters in your properties in December and February through February, when not a lot of people are out walking their dogs in the woods, that's fine too. You guys literally have the freedom to build your own program, and we could get that done very quickly just because of the fact that there's not a ton of restrictions for you guys. It wouldn't be like right away, because the other part of that is now depending on which way we go. So if we went with a community-based program where it's not using, hunters from the public, that has to go through a whole separate process. There's a very lengthy application that goes through it. We review it, and our Fish and Game Council is actually the last person that makes that final decision on if that permit can go through or not. The Fish and Game Council is kind of a checks and balances for us, so that we, as the public, you guys can make sure that we're not overstepping our bounds. The Fish and Game Council is kind of like that last little stepping stone for that. If you guys went with a more traditional program where you're using hunters from, the public, then the longest part of that would, because I'm assuming we're not going free range, we're not just opening up properties and so especially with the high densities here for people, we would probably go with more of a managed hunt, and the longest process with that will be getting hunters in and involved and then putting them through the background checks. So that would be the lengthiest part of that for us. And then also just, I'm sure that there's more checks and balances for you guys where we can't just make a program and put it in next week and hope for the best. So it wouldn't be a super lengthy turnaround depending on how determined we are to get it going, but that's all going to depend on Allendale and us and the hunters, and there's a lot of moving parts to it. So I don't know. I don't want to tell you we're good to go next week, but if we get the ball rolling, we're going with it, then we could probably get it around in a couple of months, or at least by next year.
Other questions? The back? Joe?
Joe Walter, Allendale. I have 2 questions. One is it your opinion, first of all, that putting aside the emotional thing about my arborvitae or my daylilies, but considering public safety, the long-term viability of the herd that exists in Allendale, have we overpopulated? We need to do something. Second, looking at the map that you had, sort of the safe zones now, would having some sort of management system in place for the safe zones have an impact on that? You might
have to go for it.
Absolutely. So his question basically is, do we believe that there's an overpopulation currently in Allendale? And then the second question is, do we believe that our safety zones would inhibit proper management of the deer? Do you think that would be a limiting factor? So part one, deer have a growth rate, healthy deer have a growth rate of about 30% annually. So without measuring the population, we know this basic facts about deer. Without measuring the population, if you're not doing anything, which we are not doing anything here, we could say that it is going to get overpopulated. we can assess. It's kind of the difference between the social carrying capacity and the ecological. The people have basically spoken that it is overpopulated now. We can, if we want to ignore the landscape issues, do we want to ignore public safety? I don't think so. But certainly it's going to be overpopulated for the deer themselves. We don't have those predators. We do have deer vehicle collisions, and the local animal control, I'm sure, is going to tell everybody about how that is not great for the deer themselves either. And so it's called intra-species composition. Deer versus deer competition. It's pretty brutal. They're competing for that 8 pounds of food a day in your backyards. So I would say, I haven't measured it, but it would be very unlikely that it was not overpopulated with years of this issue. Part two, with a note from the landowner, you can resolve that restriction. That takes some coordination to do that. But I would say that even if you started by having no additional permissions, just doing those areas that are open, you are going to be resolving some of those conflicts. That's certainly deer that will never get hit by cars. And even if it's just stabilizing the population, maybe we call that compensatory mortality, where the deer was gonna get hit by a car, but you shot it, and so it died that way. So that would be compensatory. And let's say in that situation, the population's not decreasing because it's all compensatory. You're still creating that positive benefit, but then for future years that some of these other issues are still persisting, and so maybe we need to remove some of those restrictions, and that's all possible with working with the local administration. In some cases, larger property owners volunteering their acreage to it.
All right.
Yeah, sure.
The other part of that with the safety zones in the smaller areas, baiting is legal in New Jersey. So the other part of this is that if you open up certain parks or whatnot, and you have bait piles in those areas where you can pull the deer out of your backyard, the ones who live in your backyard and have become very comfortable in your backyard, but are, not contributing towards rent, they may be more interested in the corn or the apples or the pumpkins or whatever the township decides to put out, to pull them out of your yard, pull them into the area where the hunters can get to them. So that's the other part of it. And if we're removing them from the park and it's creating space for the deer to move out of your backyard, chances are they're going to, especially if there's a high reward or high nutritional food that we're putting there. The other side part of that, we talked about costs a little bit, just while it's on my mind. A lot of places, I think Mercer County is one of them, they have, this isn't going to cost you guys anything to have hunters come in as, the residents. Some townships, municipalities do have a charge for their permit for them to be able to be on the property. And sometimes that permit money goes towards buying bait so that the hunters, the township or the municipality can supply bait to the hunters. They can put it out with their stand. That increases their chances of taking a deer. The other part of this is if we're talking about giving back to the community, we work very closely with Hunters Helping the Hungry. It is an organization that takes donated hunter harvested deer. They butcher them and they donate it back into your community. So like Trenton Soup Kitchen, I don't even know how many thousands of pounds of venison those people are getting on a yearly basis, but it's a very lean, very nutritious protein. So you're removing an issue and you're creating, food for somebody else that you may not even know is struggling. So that's another option too. HHH also has, Hunters Helping the Hungry also has a refrigerated trailer now. They're starting to take off. So if this turns into we're going to open this park for 1 week, HHH can come park the trailer and your hunters don't even have to take that deer to a butcher shop that participates. They can just put the deer in the trailer and their access permit fee can go towards helping to pay for the butchering cost to feed people in your own community. So that's the other part of that I just wanted to throw in before I forget.
Maybe just two more questions and then we'll have TYCO speak. So Okay.
Hi, Brian. Ali Bluffton from White House. Research by experts like Dr. Alan Ruttenberg at Tufts University shows that after deer are culled, the remaining population often rebounds due to reproductive compensation, leading to increased birth rates. Can you address that? And you mentioned that there's a 30% growth rate in deer population, but you haven't addressed the natural death of deer. Additionally, it has been documented that deer can take 2 to 7 days to die, and perchance a deer, when it's been shot by an arrow, if it dies on a property like Allendale resident, will the town be responsible to remove that deer?
Kindly repeat question 1 for me. You're asking about yeah, please repeat. Okay, thank you. That was a reminder I needed. So she's talking about some research on basically it's called density dependent fecundity. So fecundity being the number of offspring that a deer can have, density dependence being the number of deer in a given area. So we talked about how deer can they're competing with one another for resources. So she's pointing out that if you remove some deer, then there's fewer deer competing with one another. Wouldn't the reproductive rates then go up because then you have healthier deer? And so the criticism from that I'm presuming you're making is that doesn't that just mean more work? Does that just mean that more deer will have to be killed? And what I would say to that is that is a thing, absolutely. That density dependent fecundity is absolutely a thing that occurs. But it will occur with any one of these management strategies. And so she also asked about the 30% growth rate that I mentioned. So that doesn't. I'm not saying that's their capability. So if it's stabilized currently with the number of deer vehicle collisions, then we're at a 0% growth rate. And so the mortalities that you have to do, it's generally recommended because you have that 30% reproductive capability, that 30% growth rate capability. We usually recommend about 35% to 40% target if you know the number of deer. If you don't know the number of deer, then you can just increase the amount of harvest and increase the amount of effort until you see those symptoms go down. But that issue would be occurring, no matter what management strategy you're doing. Fertility control, certainly it would have an impact with that. And so I would say perhaps it's frustrating, but on the flip side, I think everyone would say if they were God and could choose, they would want fewer healthier deer rather than more unhealthy deer that are not able to sustain themselves as well. And so you had a couple other questions.
Is there anybody else that has a question?
No.
Bruce in the back.
You mentioned about
Sorry.
overpopulation. I thought Farm Bureau, the Department of Agriculture, which has done studies in the state with drones and deer density. Don't you have those figures? And what's an acceptable level or density in our area? It might differ depending upon the state. Can you quantify where we're at right now based on those studies, or haven't they been done?
That's a great question. So the question was, are there drone surveys or any other population density surveys that could be done? Have they been done locally here? And what is that healthy number? And so again, this is something that always gets challenged at every one of our presentations, but I promise you this is a recommendation that's being made countrywide, that it is very nice to know the number of deer you have. I certainly, as a biologist, I use that number of deer to correlate between the damage you're experiencing. But the damage you're experiencing is sufficient of itself to warrant action being taken. We know, we've just talked about what happens when no action is taken. So that's the point. Now, if you want to do that study, we actually just had funding last year. It sounds like we might have funding again to offer for people to a municipality to apply to perform one of those drone surveys. More power to you. I would certainly love to get a report. But it is not a prerequisite for action. And again, what is that healthy density? That is going to differ in different areas. In a open woodland, they say, ecologists would say that more than 25 deer per square mile has led to decreased diversity. I would be shocked if you don't have much more than 25 deer per square mile. That's just not, suburban deer are often documented at 100 deer per square mile, 200 deer per square mile unmanaged. So, again, my professional opinion is that I would be very surprised if you were not at a very excessive number of deer.
We did a drone survey in the celery farm just recently, and the amount of deer that were there were 5 times the normal amount that should be there for the type of food. We worked with Fike Nature Forest Association, and did get a grant for it. They also mentioned that there's like that line, and that a lot of the underbrush that is supposed to be there, that other animals actually use to nest, was completely wiped out. So the celery farm in itself, our beautiful preserve, is really suffering. Vince, this is the last one, and then we'll have TYCO speak.
I have an unusual piece of property. Ramsey Brook and Locust Brook converge of my backyard. We have about 5 acres of woodland behind the amount of deer that have now populated my backyard is incredible. I have 4 bucks, an 8-pointer, 6-pointer, and 4-pointer. I watch the 4-pointers fight. I got their feeling their oats. The scary part of it is I have 2 grandsons who love the brook. 2 things. The amount of deer excrement in our backyard has now gone exploded. Can't even walk there. The second thing is we have a patio in our backyard. We love to sit outside and have dinner. One evening, the 6-point buck decided to take about 5 to 6 charging steps at us. And he stopped. Thankfully, turned around and walked away. Frightened us to no end. I do not want to put my grandsons outside. So I have 2 questions. Does the deer excrement have a health hazard? And number 2, will deer attack people, particularly young children?
Sure. So the question is, just to summarize it more briefly, he lives in a very he backs up to woods, so he has a lot of deer, and he asked, can deer hurt people, particularly bucks? Can bucks hurt people? Will they become aggressive? And then the other question is that, are there human health concerns with deer feces? The answer to both of those is yes. So feces is a dirty thing. I apologize that I cannot speak to specifics on that. I'm basing that answer off of my general understanding that feces it hosts diseases. There's a lot of studies on that. And then aggressive deer, it happens not super often, but in these areas where particularly you have some residents perhaps feeding the deer become a lot more used to people's presence, and they lose that natural fear of humans. So I would say out in like the big woods of Stokes, we don't hear about it, but in these residential areas that there's a deer overabundance, then we do hear about it, and it's very dangerous. They obviously do have antlers that they fight each other with. We don't have antlers to protect ourselves with, so it's a big issue. As to the last time someone was gouged in New Jersey, I don't know if last year someone's gouged in New Jersey, so it's an issue.
There was it was in Bergen County too. There was a 91-year-old gentleman who lived in a community where the neighbors were feeding the deer.
Absolutely.
And,
I can also stay after TYCO's if you want.
And he walked up to it to get he walked up to the gentleman to get a snack, and the gentleman didn't have anything, and the deer did attack. They are listed as potentially dangerous species, and it's not just the racks. It's also they're very strong. They can kick. They'll trample you. It's not does will protect their fawns, and especially as we get closer and closer to the rut, the bucks will become more and more aggressive. Did you?
Yeah, let's move on. You could maybe take that after. So we're going to actually have TYCO now. If you do have extra questions, you can email them to me, and then I can, and Brian will answer them. He will also stay after for a couple of minutes if anybody has any other questions. But I want to move on to TYCO. So TYCO, many of you may know them. They are the borough's animal control agency. And you might know Carol. She's been with the borough for many years. So her daughter, Kim, she's a certified animal control officer for 26 years. You don't look that old. She will be taking over the company. She has extensive training in domestic wildlife and exotic animals. She's a member of the Bergen County Animal Response Team, West Milford Animal Response Team, and member of the New Jersey Animal Control Officer. She's devoted her life to animals. TYCO, her company, was established in 1989, starting with the borough of Hohokus and expanded to 23 different communities. They deal with all types of animals, fur, fins, feathers, or scales. The TYCO staff deals with it all. As unusual circumstances occur, TYCO adjusts their services to each and every community. TYCO has done many large-scale in both numbers and size of animal rescues. The staff at TYCO works very closely with the administration, police, health department, and the Department of Public Works in every town. Welcome. I don't know if you want to use this microphone. Stand back here, might be sure.
See how that goes. And of course, I'm very short. Yeah, so I work with animal control for quite some time. I work in Allendale. I mean, this is really about the deer. There's no reason for me to go into anything else. Every day we're working with deer. Today, literally my job was going around northern Bergen County and picking up dead deer. I did 18 today, and I stayed all up in this area. 4 were in Allendale. You guys see it. You're here. Everyone's on these roads. 17, Franklin Turnpike, over by the high school was at Hillside. Those are our main areas in this town specifically where I'm seeing majority of the deer in the accidents. It's a big problem. Is this the definite solution? I don't know. That's what everyone's got to be here to talk about, what everyone's going to agree with. From what I see more, my biggest problem is people feeding wildlife. I find that there has to be a lot more laws restricting abundant feeding. I can understand to a degree. People want to feed the birds. They want to see the animals. You want to, and I get that. That's why we live here. We want to live in the woods. But the amount of food I see put out at some locations is more than I feed my 3 dogs, which are all over 60 pounds in a month. I mean, literally, people are dumping entire 100-pound bags of corn. You see it all the time. That's more of where I see we need to control and help with the numbers, because if they're getting that much food, they're having more babies. It's easier for them to live. They're fighting us for the food. People don't want to feed. People do want to feed. We get it all the time where there is a lot of more interactions with animals, your domestic animals, cats and dogs, you know, deer stomping them, things like that, where we have a lot of interactions more than we do with people having the interaction with humans. But it does happen. We do get them. And it's typically because the neighbor to the right feeds, the neighbor on the left doesn't want to feed, and the deer are walking up to the sliding glass door because that's what they get to the right of them. They don't know the difference between your house, their house. They're just looking at the person. Oh, that person with 2 hands with the head, they sit like that. They feed us. We're going to walk up to them. That's where we have a lot of our issues with people and animals and problems along those lines. That's more of my part of this, as I would say we need to definitely be stricter with feeding laws and regulations. And, you know, maybe this is the way to go about it. It's helped in other communities, certainly. Not just in Bergen County, other ones in Essex County and those other areas that I have followed and seen, and also hiked in those Essex mountains specifically is one where I've spent a lot of time, where I did see a big difference in the deer population after the hunting. Also dealing with Lyme disease. My husband has it, to the point where he couldn't even walk at one point with all the medications and things he was on. It's a very serious problem as well that I don't think a lot of people deal with or understand. So this could be a big part of helping our community, trying to regulate these numbers and control some more of what we're seeing here. I feel like really Fish and Game was the biggest part of the presentation. I was kind of just asked to say something quick, so that's kind of my point on what I'm seeing on a daily basis. But it's unfortunate. We see a lot of the cars and deer interactions, and it's very sad. It's sad seeing the people upset about doing it, because nobody likes to be part of that accident and feeling that they injured that animal or hurting themselves. And of course, it's always horrible to see the animals suffer. That's a big part where we step in, that we need to come in and euthanize the deer, because it's just not humane. We can't just let them sit there. That's
unrealistic. It's not even reasonable. So we do see that a lot, literally between me and Rich, we're doing it every single day, especially in these areas. So
What are some of the numbers that you see, like for Allendale, for example? Do you have like that number per year or per?
So my little piece of paper, I was told this morning that I was supposed to come today because somebody else was supposed to come. So I ran to the office and went over call sheets quickly. So please excuse my little chicken scratch, but I can tell you from 2018, because that's the easier call sheets I could get to without having to go into the attic to find the rest. It was 18 deer total. There was 8 dead and 5 put to sleep through the entire year of 2019. Now we're moving up to, let's say 2022, we're up to 100 deer. And that's between putting them to sleep and dead ones picked up on the road. So yes, the numbers are increasing. Of course, rut is starting now. Right now, our numbers are looking pretty low for this year. We're around 50s, but rut hasn't started. Rut is where deer are, looking for love in the wrong places, running, not paying attention, that type of thing. And unfortunately, we're having a lot of interactions with cars and humans. So yes, our numbers in Allendale, these are just Allendale's numbers, I should say. We do a lot of the towns around here. Allendale's got a lot of deer. I will say, if you want me to be honest and real specific, I'd probably say the biggest town we have the most numbers in is Wyckoff. Wyckoff is one of the towns that there isn't a day that I don't have to euthanize a deer that's hit by a car in Wyckoff. Why? I don't know. I don't know the difference, but Wyckoff is definitely one of the towns that has the most. From there, it's moving right closer to you guys. Unfortunately, Wyckoff, Franklin Lakes, Saddle River, Saddle River's numbers have gotten much better, but it's kind of all around you guys more than what I'm specifically seeing in Allendale. So, all right. Did anyone have to come back? I want to ask more questions. Yeah, I feel like Fish and Game is the one who knows more of these expert type things, but I can answer anything if you have questions.
So we'll do a couple more questions and then we'll call it a night. Way in the back there.
I think there were about 21 counties in New Jersey. And I know there were both some, municipalities do their own program, but are there any counties that do like county-wide? I did some research a few years ago after it passed, and I know that Union County did a wildlife management program for 11 years, and when they hit the right numbers, then they stopped. So are there any counties that do like?
I don't mind getting this. Yes. So it's more so the counties that don't. So the question was, at the county government level, how many are doing deer management? And I'm also going to answer because you mentioned that Union County hit like kind of a good number and stopped. So it's a majority of the county governments have hunting programs. I mentioned Mercer County, Burlington County, Essex, and Union does still have one. So that idea that you hit that like good number and stop, that's frankly unrealistic. So this is something that these population dynamics don't go away once we reach like a critical few of them, because they will continue to breed. Surrounding areas will their offspring will disperse and come in. So the good thing about taking a high amount of action early is that you can slow it down and just sustain it, and it's a lot easier to sustain. What you've probably heard is that Union County used to get one of our special permits to do sharpshooting in their county parks. Currently, they've gotten it lower, and now they are doing more sustaining, but still pretty aggressive with volunteer hunters to perform that management. So it is because those county parks, like I showed in the previous slide, they don't have access to much of the state. And so if their neighbors aren't participating, then it does make it a little bit more challenging. That's why, it's been pretty nice to see that many of the municipalities, certainly on the western half of Bergen County, their administrations are taking the effort to educate themselves, at least, even if they're not taking action right away. At least they're educating themselves on the issue. So hopefully that regional approach will happen.
Ready up over there?
Yeah, how many how many towns in Bergen County actually have an active program?
The question was, yeah. The question was how many towns or boroughs in Bergen County? I guess you guys don't have townships. You have boroughs. Oh, you do have some townships. Okay. Anyways, personal curiosity. So how many boroughs or townships in Bergen County have management programs? And currently it is only Saddle River. So some municipalities do don't have an ordinance against hunting. That's like a couple just on the western half. Because there's some state parks in there or state forests, perhaps some state parks as well, where hunting occurs, and so they haven't outlawed it at a township wide level. But in terms of ones with an actual like deliberate management program, it's only Saddle River. And they're feeling the pain of their neighbors not helping out. It's really challenging for them to do that task alone. They're seeing positive benefits. Like I said, those deer that are removed, they're not going to get hit by a car at that point. But it would be helpful. These deer are interconnected spatially. There's movement between burrows, and so the more that help out, the better it will be, the easier it will be.
Anybody else? In the back?
Saddle River. So, two-part question. So, this woman up front. So, my first part is, what's the kill rate when a hunter shoots an arrow? And the second part, what happens if it doesn't die and runs on something else?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Sure.
Last part is, areas of food. Does the homeowner have to pay fine bills?
Okay. Sure. Perhaps you could. Do you want to just answer that last question first?
That was the case anytime there was a problem where unfortunately, I feel like I can't see you now. When unfortunately the deer did not, it wasn't a direct hit, it wasn't a great hit, and unfortunately that deer did carry off. Yes, we go and remove those deer, especially with arrows in them, things the chief has called us, we followed on, and we just go and remove them and didn't charge any homeowners. Any town roadways we would always remove, but we honestly didn't have a lot of problems with that happening. And we've always adjusted anything. If this is going on, yes, we will help the police department, the hunters, the residents follow that and take care of cleaning it up if it needs to be.
And then to answer the other parts of the question, you asked me for a specific rate of mortality with deer, and perhaps I could loop in a previous question about how long it takes for a deer to die when struck by an arrow. So the answer is it depends. If you have people that don't practice with their equipment, you'd probably have a larger, what we'd call like a wounding rate. So the number of deer that were shot but not mortally killed. So it should be very low, but like I kind of mentioned, for better or worse, we are all humans in this room, and so doing anything at our, we're trying our best. There's always that chance that you make a mistake, and so that stinks. Anyone who's hit a deer with their car knows what that feels like. That stinks. But I think there's an importance to the intention of doing it ethically. And so, if there's someone that's hunting in one of these programs that has a history of just, getting it wrong over and over again, the administration can make that decision to remove that individual. And I think they probably should, because, this is not the Wild West. This is Bergen County. And so we should hold ourselves to a high standard. But it is, so without going into the gory details, if it's shot properly, it's 100% ethical, and it should not die in 2 to 9 days or whatever. They'll die in seconds. So it's it's extremely humane. Do mistakes happen? Absolutely, but this is preventing other things like them getting hung up on a fence and getting struck by a car, and all 4 of their limbs are broken, and they're waiting for animal control to come put an end to their suffering. So intentionality, it matters quite a bit with these subjects.
Show of hands of people who are in support of a deer management program in Allendale.
What program is that? What program are they?
They did the, you want to talk about the program that Saddle River?
Sure. So the question was, what is Saddle River doing currently? So this is actually before I started with Fish and Wildlife, but I know about it, so I can speak to it a bit. So they're using volunteer hunters. All of those hunters in that program are part of a hunting nonprofit group. It's called United Bow Hunters of New Jersey. There's benefits to that, having that level of organization, where that group is held accountable for all of their members' actions. And that's largely happening on private people's properties. I actually don't believe that they've opened up municipal lands. You can correct me if I'm wrong. That's correct. So to me, that's inadvisable. I think both would be the best. I think that those municipal lands, they're in your control in the administration, and they should be considered. You can do park closures and things like that. But that's currently what they're doing on private land only, volunteer, resident, homeowners in the area, landowners in the area, volunteer, and then those homes get put on a list where that occurs, and there's close coordination, like she said, with local PD, and if there's issues, the animal needs to get put down for whatever reason, so there's that additional level of coordination. Sure. Yeah. So just to expand on like that, the hunting ethic, and so mortality rates and things like that. So forgive me. This is like, if this is more than anyone wants to hear, I apologize. But I think it's important to be honest about what we're talking about. So the proper shot with archery equipment is through both lungs. So part of the reason for that is because it's about 6 inches in any direction. So it's a big target for an accomplished archer to do that. It honestly doesn't take a lot of practice for them to be able to do that. If you hit both lungs, what will happen is that the deer is going to get scared because it felt something unusual, perhaps painful. It's going to sprint away, and it's sprinting away. It's going to remove all of that oxygen, and it's going to pass out, and that happens within seconds. And so the hunter overwhelmingly sees that deer die. So that's, it's usually less than 100 yards that deer is going to run. So again, apologies. That's like, nobody likes thinking about death of anything. But that's what happens. And so, that concern that it could wind up on another landowner's property, it's totally possible. It could totally happen. But also when a deer gets hit by a car, it's going to hobble onto somebody's property and die there. So it's something that everyone's dealing with. Funny enough, when I worked with Edison Township, I expressed that concern. I told them, this is something you need to consider, that the deer where you shoot it is not always going to be where it winds up. And so you might have that potential conflict with residences or with, residents. And they told me that they're experiencing it all the time already with deer vehicle collision mortality, injuries as well.
One more question back.
Now, could you just talk to some of the towns that aren't doing control towns and managed hunting? And with hunting season being so long, are they limiting it to certain days, certain times, so that residents know when it's going on to avoid those areas, or if they don't want to be in town when it happens, that they're not going to have the deer going to their property when they're there, that type of thing. So how do they manage the safety in such a densely populated area and the time frame to be as effective as possible, but not have it, drawn out for 6 months?
Absolutely. And we would recommend against having it go on for that extended period, certainly on your public lands. On private properties, you could be more lax because you're getting those private permissions. But let's just use for the example, and I apologize. The question was, are there things that we can do to limit that 6-month-long hunting season to just make it more palatable, set expectations for the residents of Allendale or other townships? So the answer is yes. All of those regulations, we would recommend posting signs up, and we have money. We're producing signs that we can give out to alert residents that this is a property. When you go by the trail kiosk, this is a property that gets deer management. Here are the dates with that deer management. So if somebody's uncomfortable with that, even if the park's not closed, if they're uncomfortable, they don't, they can make their own decision. It is very effective to say, I have 6 months without a special permit. maybe once a month you close it for 2 weekdays, something like that, where that management activity occurs. So, all of these things require coordination with public safety officials, local PD. We'll come out and do site inspections and make sure that these properties are actually suitable. And so you arrive at some sort of compromise with any of these programs. But yes, certainly the answer is that as much as the municipality wants to, manage it, get public feedback, in some cases, like, the first year it didn't, like, people were unhappy with it in this local spot. So they pull it for next year and see how it goes without it. So there's always flexibility.
There's not a lot of, have to be aware that the publicity or the public awareness is so important.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. So she's reiterating the importance of public education, and this is step one of that. But online postings, certainly park postings, in some cases, if people are used to having their kids run out the back door and into the woods, maybe you post the boundary as well. Maybe you send out letters to those neighboring properties to make them aware. But certainly, I would definitely say New Jersey has never had a non-hunter injured by a hunter. It has just never happened. It feels uncertain. It feels unsafe. But if these are all vetted hunters that are specifically permitted by the township, by us, then the hunter might just say hi to the kids and say, "Hey, I'm up today." It doesn't have to be that negative interaction. The hunter should be, quite safe, and they know where they're hunting. It's not Stokes.
All right, Brian, I'd like to thank you so much for an informative discussion. And I'd like to thank everybody for coming out. If there is any more questions, feel free to email me, and Brian graciously said he would answer any questions. So thanks everybody for coming. Really appreciate it.